All right, welcome into chapter 15, second to last chapter. Today we take a look at interpersonal and organizational communication, mastering the exchange of information. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. So, today, what lies ahead in this chapter, we have 6 learning objectives. We're going to talk about the communication process of communicating our message to employees within the workplace. We're also going to talk about comparing communication channels and appropriate ways for managers to use them. We're going to identify barriers to communication and ways managers can overcome them. We're also going to discuss how managers can successfully use social media to communicate. 15.5 takes a look at identifying ways for managers to improve their listening, writing, and speaking skills. And then finally, 15.6, we review the techniques for improving career readiness competencies of networking. So a lot to get to in this chapter, the penultimate chapter within the course. 6 learning objectives today, so a little bit longer than chapter 13, but a little bit shorter than chapter 14. So kind of right there in a happy medium. So empathy. So talking about the managing you portion of this is one we can probably all relate to, improving your use of empathy for other individuals within your organization. So
Attention, please. The following student.
So practicing your best listening skills when it comes to improving your use of empathy and really trying to understand what your people are going through, and just the art of not interrupting them, and understanding kind of what is actually going on, what's being said. If you're interrupting them, it kind of prevents you from focusing on the other person or the message. Be mindful. So you got to be mindful in terms of understanding what that individual is going through, trying to empathize with them, trying to understand where they're coming from. So it allows you to ignore the negative, insecure, or irrelevant thoughts that pop into your head that distract you from listening to what someone is saying. Observe nonverbal cues and be mindful of your own. So pay attention to the speaker's body language, their facial expressions, their tone, but then also remember that your nonverbals, your tone, also carry weight in a conversation. So understanding that you yourself are going to give off, certain tells, and you have to be understanding that, how you convey your body, your nonverbal, your body language can impact an interaction as well. Practice perspective thinking or taking, excuse me, practice perspective taking. So this amounts to taking other person's point of view when communicating with them. If you're having trouble understanding where someone's coming from, try asking yourself, what would you do if the situation were reversed? And if you were in that person's shoes. Know your audience. So whether you're making a presentation to a group, speaking one-to-one, be sure you understand how your audience already knows about the topic and what you're speaking, and then show genuine interest and be curious. So those are ways that you as a manager can improve your empathy within an organization. And one of the most valuable things you can have as a manager is, showing empathy for your people, caring for your people, because a lot of times that will be reciprocated in the work that they do. So good way to start here in terms of, practicing your skills, building your competencies when it comes to managing individuals. All right, as we take a look here now, as we get into 15.1, so we'll take a look at the communication process, what it is, how it works. So we'll talk about communication and how it is defined. So the transfer of information and understanding, talk about how the communication process works, and then we'll select the right medium for effective communication. So communication is the transfer of information, understanding from one person to another. This process involves the sender, the message, and the receiver. Then we'll talk about encoding and decoding here in a second. We'll talk about the medium, the feedback, and also what we call the noise or the interference that can challenge the message. So managers need to tailor their communication to the appropriate medium for the appropriate situation. We'll take a look at rich and lean means of communication. So again, communication defined the transfer of information and understanding. So communication, transfer of information and understanding from one person to another. You are an efficient communicator when you can transmit your message accurately in the least amount of time. You're an effective communicator when your intended message is accurately understood in or by the other person. So there is a slight difference there between being an efficient and effective communicator. Ultimately, you want to have a little of both here. You want to be efficient. You want to get information out in a timely fashion, so your people aren't necessarily waiting around or potentially hearing it from other individuals that are not you, which can cause disruption, to say the least. One of the things where it's seen pretty popular is with professional athletes, where they find out they've been released by a team or traded by a team, and they hear about it on Twitter. Or an individual gets fired from a job, a high profile job, say in the media, and the first place they hear about it is from Twitter, right? That's not being a very efficient communicator. Now, it is effective in that it's understood that they've been let go, but there's not a lot of tact there. It's not a very efficient way, and it certainly doesn't make your organization look good if people are finding out that they've been traded or let go via a third-party source. So you want to be effective in that your communication is accurately understood, but you also, again, want to get that to them in a timely manner. So now we take a look at the process. So the sender, the message, and the receiver. So the sender, message, and the receiver. So the sender is the person wanting to share the information. So that's called a message. And the receiver is the person whom the message is intended for. So with this, just think about this lecture here. So I'm the sender. I'm the person sharing the information. Okay. This is called the message. This video lecture is the message. And then you guys are the receiver. You guys are my intended audience for this material. So then we have encoding. So this is translating a message into understandable symbols or language. Okay, so for instance, I'm doing this encoding via an audio medium where I'm talking about the message. I'm trying to make you understand it. Whether it be examples or just the language that I'm speaking. I'm trying to be as clear as I possibly can, even though we all know it's me, so that can be a struggle sometimes. The decoding is the interpreting and trying to make sense of the message. Okay, so this decoding happens on your guys' end, where you listen to the video lecture, you maybe jot notes down, you maybe try to think about your own examples with the material that I'm talking, but ultimately you're trying to make it make sense in your own mind. And then we have the medium. So the medium is the means by which you as a communicator send a message is important, whether it's typing a text or an email, hand scrawling a note, or communicating by voice, in person, or video conference, right? So imagine if I tried for a minute just to type all of this information that I'm going to send, that I'm going to talk about here. Imagine me trying to do that via an email, right? Where I just type out everything that I say, and then I send it to you in an email for you to pick out the most important parts, right? That would be the medium, in this case, an email. Probably not the most effective, right? So we use two types of medium with this video lecture. We use the PowerPoint, to which I'm reading off of and sort of guiding you, but then we also use the video conference method where I talk about different examples, right? So the medium, how you deliver the message certainly matters when it comes to the effectiveness of it. And then the means, that's the pathway by which the method travels, in this case, video conference. And then we have feedback. So feedback whereby the receiver expresses his or her reaction to the sender's message. Paraphrasing occurs when people restate their own words, the crux of what they heard or read, right? So this would be the feedback. So for instance, if you had, concern or a question regarding my video lecture, okay, this would be the feedback portion, right? Or maybe something wasn't quite clear, or something didn't quite make sense to you, and you needed it re-explained to you, right? That would be the feedback portion of this. And then the last part of the communication process is the noise. So this is any disturbance that interferes with the transmission or understanding of a message. So for instance, if you're trying to listen to this video lecture while playing Xbox, okay, the Xbox in this case is noise, right? This is where you are being distracted from what the message is trying to convey. Or you're watching this and a commercial comes on, right? And you're distracted by the commercial, okay? It's any sort of disturbance, right? Your parents call you, from the kitchen telling you supper's ready, right? That's noise, okay? That's any disturbance. And then we have jargon. So jargon is terminology specific to a particular profession or group, right? And you'll see where, for instance, the term ISAPS, right? That's an education jargon term, right? That doesn't mean anything to corporate America. The only thing it might mean is if you have a worker that says, "Oh yeah, I remember when I took the Iowa State assessments," right? Every organization, every industry is going to have some sort of terminology that is with their group or perspective, or with their group or organization. All right, figure 15.1, you can see this on page 643. This is how the communication process works. So you can kind of see it better on the book there, but you've got your sender, you've got your message, then you've got your receiver. And then in the middle there, we've got the noise. So that's the static, the slurring, any distraction that you might have. And then ultimately we see the feedback, right, where the receiver expresses the reaction or feedback through the medium. All right, and then we talk about the medium. So is a medium rich or lean in information? So high media richness, this is best for routine, ambiguous situations. So the more media richness is, for instance, face-to-face would be high media richness, where you are communicating with that individual. You are trying to be as clear as possible when it comes to what the expectation is, what the message is. Okay. Then we have video conferencing, where maybe you're, via Zoom conference, you can still see that individual's face. It's a little bit more impersonal. There's probably more individuals within the video conference, but again, there's the you seeing of the person, seeing that message trying to be conveyed. Then we have telephone, where again, it's that person's voice. There may or may be more than one other person on the line with the telephone, but it kind of has that happy medium. Okay. And then we have the low media richness. So this is best for routine and clear situations. So personal written media, so email, text, memos, letters, and then interpersonal or impersonal written media, so newsletters, flyers, general reports. And social media can also fit into these responses, where it's probably going to meet a lot of people. Okay, it's more generalized information that everybody within an organization needs to know, and it's stuff that still can carry weight in terms of importance, but the information is a little bit more straightforward. And you guys can see that medium richness handout or figure on page 646 within your book. So now we kind of move on here to selecting the right medium for effect. I keep seeing median. Selecting the right medium for effective communication. So matching the appropriate medium to the appropriate situation. Rich medium is best for non-routine situations and to avoid oversimplification. All right. So one thing that we do as a district, where on Wednesdays we have after school meetings. So we talk about that's more of a rich medium, where everybody gathers in the library for a staff meeting. That's where we talk about non-routine situations. We call it professional development, where we have a little bit of training that we do, and we try not to avoid the oversimplification. But then we have a lean medium, where it's best for routine situations to avoid overloading, right? So for instance, if we have an issue with a student, right, where they maybe have to go to in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension, right, we don't convene a face-to-face meeting for that. That's more done so via email. It's like, hey, so-and-so will be, in school suspension. Please send work, to in-school suspension, right? So that's an example of more of a lean medium. It's, fairly routine. The expectations are pretty clear with what happens in that sort of situation. That can be done via an email, right? So that's kind of the one thing that you have to look at and take stock of when doing this is, what exactly are we discussing here? Is this something that can be sent in an email, or is this something that we really need to convene all parties and talk about? How managers fit into the communication process. So formal communication channels, so up, down, sideways, and outwards, and then informal communication channels, which we'll talk a little bit more about here. And that is where we cross the line into cross the line into section 15.2. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the formal communication channels, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the informal communication channels as well. So vertical communication, up and down the chain of command. So vertical communication is the flow of messages up and down the hierarchy within the organizations. Bosses communicating with subordinates communicating with bosses. So in the vertical communication flow, if I'm on the lowest level of employee, I might talk to my manager. The manager might talk to the store director. The store director might talk to the regional manager. Regional manager might talk to the vice president. Vice president might talk to the CEO, right? It's very up the ladder in terms of what is happening with an organization, right? Or then vertical, the other way down is, CEO, board of directors might make a decision. They communicate it to their vice presidents. Vice presidents communicate it to the regional managers to store directors to managers to employees, right? So it's very hierarchy, it's, up and down the ladder, up and down the chain of command. Horizontal communication. So this is within and between work units. So horizontal communication flows between the work units. Its main purpose is coordination, right? So when you have multiple different multiple different departments within an organization, you want to try and work on coordinating as much as possible. So for instance, if you're Hy-Vee, as an example, and you've got your marketing department, you've got your accounting department, you've got human resources, and let's say you've got your produce department. Let's say you have a, produce mega sale that's going on, right? Well, you want to communicate and coordinate between all four of those entities to properly advertise and market and making sure we have the product that we're going to sell. You want to communicate with human resources to make sure that we have enough hours in the budget to schedule employees to work said mega sale. We want to talk to accounting because, we want to make sure we have the funds in order to do so. And of course, then we want to talk to, and have the produce manager and the produce department involved because, well, it's their sale, right? So you want to have all of those coordination. Well, that's a horizontal communication, right? So it's between work units. It's individuals who are trying to coordinate to, in this case, have a successful sale, right? So that's more of an example between horizontal communication. And then we have external communication, so outside the organization. So external communication flows between people inside and outside the organization. You can see examples with this with external communication. We can talk about, people or employees, talking to potential customers outside the organization. You can talk about, managers, giving media interviews. You can talk about managers talking with vendors outside the organization, right? Again, going back to like a Hy-Vee example where it's a manager who has, maybe an issue with a Pepsi vendor, or they have to, maybe order new product in, or maybe order less product in, right? That's external communication. Pepsi is not within the Hy-Vee organization. So, you have to go outside of the organization and outside of the realm sometimes to make those situations work. All right. Informal communication. So we have this thing called the grapevine, right? Maybe you've heard the term, I've heard through the grapevine. So informal communication channels develop outside the formal structure and do not follow the chain of command. They are more spontaneous, can skip management levels, and cut across the lines of authority. So the grapevine. Grapevine is the unofficial communication system of the informal organization, a network of in-person and online gossip and rumor. I'm sure you guys have seen all of this before. You yourselves have probably participated in the grapevine with just your own personal lives, or it's like, oh, hey, I heard that such and such did this. It's gossip, it's rumor, right? It may or may not be true, but it's just what the word on the street is, right? So it's unofficial communication, right? There was no formal announcement, no like, yeah, this is what happened, from that person or people involved. It's all speculatory. And we have face-to-face communication. So despite the entrenched use of quick and efficient electronic communication in our lives, face-to-face conversation is still justifiably a major part of most people's workday, where, again, it's, one of those things where if you need to communicate a difficult message, or, you need to make sure an individual understands something, there's no better replacement for being in the room talking to that person. That way you can kind of gauge like, oh, yes, they understand, or, oh, no, they don't understand. I need to figure out ways to, help them understand their situation. Otherwise, it could potentially hurt our business and our company, right? So we need to, have those face-to-face interactions in order to be more successful. And as we're kind of seeing now, those face-to-face interactions are becoming less and less common now with Zoom conferences, video conferences, remote work. So, it's going to be kind of a push and pull of progress here when it comes to more remote work, where you still want people to be on the same page But you also want to understand that work is heading towards a more remote practice, and that's going to be interesting, to say the least, how it plays out over the next 5-10 years. All right, let me take a look here. So we actually move now in to 15.3. We're going to take a look at barriers to communication. So we're going to take a look at physical barriers, sound, time, and space. We're going to talk about personal barriers, so individual attributes that hinder communication. We're going to talk about cross-cultural barriers, nonverbal communication, how unwritten and unspoken messages may mislead. And then we will also talk about gender differences. So this is 15.3 as we go along here. So this table is on page 653 in your book. These are some of our barriers to communication. So the sender barrier, no message gets sent. So here's an example of that. If a manager has an idea but is afraid to voice it because he or she fears criticism, then obviously no message gets sent. The encoding barrier, so the message is not expressed correctly. So if the person, if people have a different first language, the meaning of the words can be misinterpreted. The medium barrier, the communication channel is blocked. So this includes empathy, allowing you to show others that you care, in the organization. Intuition, so keenly, so you keenly understand how your emotions, actions affect others. Decoding barrier, so the recipient doesn't understand the message. So you pulled an all-nighter traveling back from spring break, and today your brain is fuzzy and unfocused during class lectures, right? So that would be a decoding barrier, where you maybe just don't get the message of the lesson. Then we have the receiver barrier. No message gets received. So because you were texting during class lecture, you weren't listening when your professor announced a new assignment due tomorrow. That'd be an example of that. And then the feedback barrier. The recipient didn't respond. So you give someone driving directions, but since they only nod their head and don't repeat the directions back to you, you really don't know whether you were understood. So these are just some different barriers to communication. So physical boundaries, sound, time, and space. Take a look at technology issues such as a crashed laptop, phone reception, no Wi-Fi. Those can be a physical barrier. The noise, such as talking over you, or construction sounds, or mom calling in from the kitchen, or you trying to watch Netflix while studying. Those are examples. Physical distance, which represents a barrier where there's either too much of it or not enough if the people are involved in the communication. So those are some examples of physical barriers. Personal barriers. So barriers, individuals, attributes that hinder communication. So variable skills in communicating effectively. So variations in the way we process and interpret information, variations in trustworthiness and credibility, attention issues, and then generational differences. So variable skills in communicating effectively. Some people are simply better communicators than others. Better communication skills can be learned. Variations in the way we process and interpret information. So senders can avoid misinterpretation by communicating clearly. Receivers can avoid misinterpretation by paraphrasing. Variations in trustworthiness and credibility. Low trust damages communication. Focus on building a trusting foundation. Then we have attentional issues. So mindlessness is a state of reduced attention. It is expressed in behavior that seems rigid or thoughtless. Try focusing on one thing at a time. Or take a digital break, put the phone down. Generational differences. So younger generations are growing less likely to use email. Oldest and youngest employees are more open to embracing new technology, and organizations should provide training and support to help all generations master and figure out information within their organization. Cross-cultural barriers. So we've got language differences and style differences. So with language differences, one obvious reason is that the language differences often exist. For example, jokes and humor are very much linked to culture. And then style differences, communication style can vary widely by culture, and knowing what to expect gives workers a great disadvantage, right? So, you think about, both of these and just some of the euphemisms and jokes that, Midwesterners might use versus, people from, say, the East or West Coast, right? Or, take it one step further, jokes that Midwesterners might say that, might have totally foreign meaning to somebody from, say, Africa, right? So those language differences very much linked to culture. And then the communication styles can vary widely by culture, the style differences, right? So you think about the way that, some businesses approach work in other organizations, other countries across the nation or across the world, right? The styles can just be very difficult, which cause those communication barriers. Then we've got nonverbal communication, how unwritten and unspoken messages may mislead. So eye contact. So Westerners use eye contact to signal the beginning and end of a conversation, to reflect interest and attention, and convey both honesty and respect. So incorrectly interpreting these nonverbal communications as evasive behavior could lead to an unfortunate misunderstanding. Facial expressions. A search of Reddit forums on how to identify someone as American is likely to return one answer over and over. They're smiling. You're probably used to thinking that smiling represents warmth, happiness, or friendship, whereas frowning represents dissatisfaction or anger. But people in some cultures are less openly demonstrative than people in the United States. Body movements and gestures. So, open body positions such as leaning slightly backwards express openness, warmth, closeness, and availability for communication. Closed body positions such as folded arms or crossed legs can signal defensiveness. Angling your body away from the other person generally makes you look uninterested. Then we take touch. So, norms for touching vary significantly. For example, kissing on the cheek, patting on the shoulder, or hugging may seem appropriate in business for some people, but others may find these actions offensive in a professional context. And you've probably seen that where I think the kissing on the cheek, especially in Europe, is a lot more accepted than say here in the United States. I think if that happened here in the United States, we'd kind of go like, "Whoa, like, what are you doing?" Let's get out of my bubble. Whereas in Europe, it's a little bit more readily accepted. And then we've got gender differences. So two statements about gender and communication differences. So some observable differences in communication across the gender spectrum. Most of these differences are likely to result in socialization rather than biology. So linguistic style, a person's characteristics, speaking patterns, pacing, pausing, directness, word choice, and use of questions, jokes, stories, or apologies and similar devices. So linguistic style is one of those generational differences. And then here are some other gender differences. So communication characteristics, so taking credit. So the masculine using I statements, feminine is more using the we, displaying confidence, hiding uncertainty about an issue. With the feminine, it's more revealing a lack of certainty about an issue. Talking pattern, so interrupting and talking over others, waiting to speak until others are finished, is the more feminine. With listening silently and without the need for positive overlap, such as I agree or that's right, to demonstrate listening. Whereas the feminine is a little bit more, using positive statements like I agree or that's right. The focus of talk, reporting, demonstrating expertise. With the feminine, it's more building relationships and sharing, and then making a request done by this needs to be done by at the end of the day. Or if you're, feminine, asking such as, would you do this by the end of the day? Okay. Now, by no means is this 100% exactly how it goes all the time. In fact, I think you guys probably recognize it. This is probably not how it goes 100% all the time. These are more generalized observations, through various studies that have happened in management, right? So this is not something that, holds water 100% of the time. Okay, it's important to recognize that.